So why don't we just begin with a prayer? In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord Jesus Christ, you're the way, the truth, and the life. And you are the one who shows us that truth and that beauty and that goodness that we were all created for. I ask that you be with us this evening. Give us your wisdom, your insight. This may be just a meeting that just brings a lot of clarity and goodness to these things that we're contemplating and thinking about for the future of our school. And may God just continue to be with us, and we just ask all these things in Christ's name. Amen. St Teresa, and the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. There are plenty of seats, so yeah, don't be shy. So again, thank you for coming this evening. And again, it's going to be a good opportunity to look at different aspects of what we're talking about with regard to the proposed in this whole idea of a Catholic liberal education. And so I'd like to first introduce His Excellency, Bishop Conley, just thank him for his time and efforts in this aspect of this vision. And if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit of your vision.
Thank you for having me. And thank all of you. Can everybody hear me back there? No, thank you. And I'm excited to be here. It's kind of one of my passions, education, and it's had such an impact on my life, a particular kind of education. And I first of all want to thank all of you for your prayers for the time I was away. I say that every place. It's pretty safe. I have confirmation here at St Teresa. Can't say enough. Thank you for your prayers. It means keep coming. I'm doing a lot better, and I'm just grateful for all the prayers of so many people. The way this is going to work, I'm going to talk for about 25 minutes, and I got the clock right there, so you can remind me. And then I'd like to go on the subject. But I'll talk about 25 minutes to Dr. Hecker, Deacon Matt is going to. He said bad cleanup, so he's going to come and clean up after I've messed everything up. And then we're going to open up a Q&A. So please feel free to ask any questions. I know there was some kind of a communication glitch about the whole thing and about how it kind of came about in forming discussions and things like that. So we want to clear that up, and don't hesitate to have ask any questions of me or Dr. Hecker. Or Father Hadvi or Sister Mary Cecilia, so that we can, go away from here with, clarity. I think, like you said, clarity and understanding of where we are. And this is just kind of a conversation, really. And I want you to be part. I want you to be part of it. If you have any questions, some of you know my story, and I thought I'd start off in the first 2 minutes or so to tell my story, because my experience with liberal arts education really kind of shaped my whole life, and really led to my conversion to the Catholic faith and also my vocation to priesthood. And so it's just so much a part of me that when I talk about the subject, I always think back my own experience of this kind of education. I was raised in the Protestant church, Presbyterian church. I went to public schools until I was public schools my whole life, except for when I went to seminary. It was the first Catholic school I ever went to. But my high school was a big high school in Overland Park, Kansas, Shawnee Mission West High School. There were 714 in my graduating class. So it was a big high school. And it wasn't, part of it was my fault, but part of it was the school's fault. It wasn't a very good education. I didn't really have any kind of, anything that, this was the 70s, so it was kind of crazy times. Some of you have seen, remember the 70s. Most of you don't, you're younger. But, so part of it was my fault, and I was not the best student. But I didn't have any love for learning either. And I wasn't really excited in learning. My teachers and kind of things we were learning. It just didn't excite me. Until I got to college. And I, by God's providence, stumbled into a program at the University of Kansas, of all things, called the Integrated Humanities Program. And it was a freshman sophomore program that was it satisfied your credits for English, Western Civ, and speech. And I have to confess, that's why I took it. I knocked off those classes in one fell swoop. And so I didn't have any altruistic, desires to learn, anything like this. Although I was attracted, we went to a college fair, and they had brochures and pictures. And I remember seeing this brochure on this program, the Integrated Humanities Program, and the motto of the program was, "Let them be born and wonder." And it had a college kid of that time period, so he had long hair. I had long hair. The reason why I don't have hair now is because he gave us a hard time getting haircuts. I was getting back at you. And so we had a kid, long hair, jeans, t-shirt. He was standing out in the middle of the Kansas wheat field looking up at the stars. You can see the big dip there. And the Latin for that was nascantur and ad ratione. Let them be born. Subjunctive, I see Dr. Peters here. Subjunctive, it's let them be born. Nascantur and ad ratione. And that did, and that kind of appealed to me. And I didn't realize it subconsciously. And I looked through the brochure and I saw that they read, these great books that I kind of heard about. The Iliad and the Odyssey, the Greek classics, and just different books that I never read in my life. I don't think I read a book. Serious. Making a big confession. I don't think I read well, maybe Catcher in the Rye. That's the only one I remember in high school. And so I wasn't attracted by that. And so I entered the program, and almost immediately I began to kind of fall in love with what we were doing. How do we mention truth, goodness, and beauty? Those are sort of the overarching themes. How do we discover truth, goodness, and beauty? Through literature, history, art, architecture, poetry, and then also the gymnastic arts. And we, for example, memorized poetry. I never memorized it. And so we would memorize, I remember the first poem we memorized. "O western wind, when looked up low, the small rain down from me. O Christ of my love, were in my arms, I in my bed again." I didn't have a clue what that meant, and I still it just sounds good. And in fact, you would learn these poems in just reams and reams of poetry. I mean, you'd be at a party with somebody recite poems. It was just something that gave us confidence, because we were learning these things. Every class would start with a song. So usually in every class, usually a young woman, usually very pretty, she would come out with this guitar and she would teach us, usually like an old folk song, like Stephen Foster, American folk song, or an English ballad. So they were kind of filling our minds with this repertoire of beauty, poetry, and music, great poems and great music. And then we were reading these books, and like I said, I don't think I had memorized anything, maybe some Grateful Dead lyrics. That was the only thing I had in my imagination. And what they were trying to do, they were trying to appeal to the imagination. And I remember a story about one of our professors, Dr. John Sr., who, there were three professors, that was the other thing that was unique. There were three professors that team taught in this big auditorium with 150 students, which is, it's hard to kind of keep the attention of 150 students, but they were great teachers. And they were all tenured professors. Two of them were English professors, and the other one was a classics professor, Dr. Sr. And he ended up becoming my godfather. I remember hearing a story about him and another professor, Ronald McCarthy, and this was before he came to the University of Kansas. And they always would have these debates about what's wrong with education today. This was back in the late 60s. And MacArthur said the problem with education today is there's a crisis of reason. People just they're not thinking. They can't reason. So we have to restore, a reason, logic. And Senior said, well, I don't disagree with you, but I think before you do that, there's a crisis of the imagination. You've got to restore the imagination because young people don't have anything in their imaginations. That precedes philosophy, precedes higher things. So MacArthur went off to California and founded Thomas Aquinas College, which is still existing, and it's been very successful through the years, liberal arts college. Senior went to the University of Kansas and joined these other two professors, and they started the integrated humanities. And I tell that because that was, I think, what was unique about this particular program was that it really did appeal to the imagination. And like I said, we didn't have much in our imaginations. And what it did was it lit a spark of love to learn, to want to know more. And we couldn't wait to go to class. We just soaked it in, and we just filled us with joy. We wanted to know more. And it really set us on a path of lifelong learning, forever learning. Because we realized, that we were just getting the tip of the iceberg. There's so much to learn. And that was what happened to the students. Now, they were great teachers, but also we were reading great books, and we were forming great friendships. And I've always believed that teaching and education is a species of friendship. There's a friendship and a love that develops between a teacher and a student, and it's a unique kind of love. And as you fall in love with the learning, there's this great bond. And I think you can all think about the teachers we've had in our lives. Back, I remember my fourth grade teacher, Miss Ellis. I think that's one of the things that really we fell in love with our professors. We just hung on every word that they said. So, like I said, we studied, and Dr. Senior would call this the poetic mode of learning. It's kind of like the imaginative. And it wasn't just this sort of ethereal, poems. And, we would also go out. That was part of the class, was we'd go out into the countryside and at night and learn the constellations of the stars. And one of the older upperclassmen would come and would teach us, constellations. And just that, and it would be a smaller group. Groups would go out in smaller numbers. And just to go out there at night to look at the stars, and just kind of lifts you up. And we're reading these books of Greek mythology that were linked to the stars and the Greek gods and goddesses. There's constellations named after Greek goddesses and gods. That kind of linked into the books we were reading. We had a fair in the fall where we would just a country fair. We would put it on. Students would got everything together. We'd have like these contests. And, people would bring food, bake pies, things like that. And again, that cultivated friendship. And then in the spring, we would have a formal waltz. And as you can imagine, none of us would have a waltz. We didn't. So we had to have waltz series. So the spring waltz would take place like in May, and or at the end of April. But then we had to take lessons in waltzing, and we didn't want to, especially the guys, we didn't want to make klutzes of themselves for women, so we had to make sure that we were learning how to do it. And then when we finally had the waltz, at the end of the semester, we would rent out the university ballroom. We'd hire the university orchestra, and they would have these 6 Strauss waltzes. You'd have a dance card. You'd have 6 ladies' names. And you had to go over and find her. She was escorted out on the dance floor. And you had to dance, and then take her back and do all these things. And that experience, that real hands-on experience, really helped us to learn manners and to learn men, to learn how to be gentlemen, and ladies, women to learn how to be ladies, And it really lifted, it was magical. I mean, you imagine romance too. I mean, there were a lot of people who fell in love with waltzes and getting married. And it was perfect for that. But that's just another example of just an experience that we had that was very poetic and very kindled that love for beauty and goodness. Those themes, truth, goodness, and beauty. Now, the professors would always tell us that this is a remedial course in college schools because you should have this back in elementary school. And they kept saying that, and I never did understand what they meant. But I believe it's true that this kind of education really is best, not at the college level, but at the elementary level. Because that's when the imagination, that's when you can memorize. I had a hard time memorizing. My mind was already, corrupted in a certain sense. But you teachers, and I see the more teachers, and you know that kids in second grade, or third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, they're like sponges, and they can memorize reams and reams of poetry. And it's amazing. They can learn so much. Their minds are just like sponges. So, what is a classical curriculum? Now, I don't use the C word often in classical because sometimes it will cause people to be defensive, and I like to use the L word, liberal. That throws people off. So, Catholic liberal education. This is really the more formal type of Catholic liberal education. Liberal meaning free. That the education frees you to be who you're called to be. But that kind of education, and like I said, if you say classical, sometimes people will think that either I'm incompetent, I can't, I don't know this, I have to get classical education myself, so therefore I can't. I'm out of my comfort zone. But when we were freshmen in college, we were nowhere. There's nothing. That's really false. You don't have to have a classical background to understand what classical education is. And two, some people think it's elitist. It's either for the gifted or for wealthy, like the academy, and it's exclusive. And I like to use the example of Mary Pat Donahue, which I'm on the board of this. It's called the Institute for Catholic Liberal Education. The Institute for Catholic Liberal Education. And this is an institute, sisters know, they've done a few conferences, but it's a national institute which helps support superintendents. They have conferences, they have teachers to help people to help implement or understand this kind of education, Catholic liberal education, and that kind of education is an education that educates the whole person, and educates someone with a Christian anthropology. They really understand who they are and what they are made for. And it takes all kinds of shapes and forms. Sometimes you run across the word trivium. Trivium is an ancient word, a Greek word, that, it's a Latin word, but it goes back to the Greeks. That includes grammar, rhetoric, and logic. So those were some of the first three things children back in Greece, in ancient Greece, would learn. And that would be the very basics, would be grammar, rhetoric, and logic. And then they would go on to the quadrivium, which means four. Trivium means three. Quadrivium, four, means we include arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. So those are sort of the ancient foundations of liberal education. You begin with those. Those are the building blocks at the elementary school level. Oftentimes, Latin is a component in the liberal education, Catholic liberal education. Why Latin? Well, Latin helps you think in categories, and it helps shape your mind to make distinctions and to be able to recognize words and roots of words and prefixes and suffixes. And, you know, there's a chance you're not going to grow up to be a Latin professor right now. You know, maybe you are. But you're not going to be speaking because nobody speaks Latin. Well, some people do, but, you know, that's really not the purpose of studying Latin. It's to help form the mind to think in categories and to be able to make distinctions. And Latin grammar does that. And then memorization of Latin, too. It helps. You see words, English words, in Latin. Reading is really a very large part of what liberal arts education is. You might be studying history of the Civil War, and then you'd be reading a novel about that is a fiction, and it makes it become more real to you. As Matthew Arnold said, liberal education is an education in the best that has ever been thought and said. That's a famous quote from him. The best that ever been thought and said. This book, which I think there's some copies of here, this just came out. This was published by the Catholic Liberal Education Institute, and it's called Renewing Catholic Schools: How to Regain a Catholic Vision in Secular Age. And we know that we are living in an increasingly secular age. We have good schools. This isn't any, in fact, we have better schools, I think, than most dioceses. There's no question about Catholic identity in our schools. We have priests and nuns teaching in our schools. I mean, that's unusual, very unusual. In fact, I don't know of any other diocese that have as many priests and nuns teaching in their schools. So there's no problem with Catholic identity. But I believe that the secular culture is so invasive and it is so toxic. And if you just look at those health standards and compose it for the public schools and see, you know, when you look at us, are you kidding? This is for real. And it is. And it's time. And so I think that we have to really prepare our young people for culture. I talked to some of our priests who teach pious, and they tell me that a lot of their students were going to Mass that they believe pious. And they were good students. They were surprised. But it's the culture has such an effect on people. Unless they really are confident in what they know and what they believe, and have a certain kind of strength that comes from knowing what you know, and being able to recognize error, and being able to know how to defend your faith, but more than just defend your faith, defend truth, which is beauty. Rosemary Anderson Rosemary Anderson has an essay here. She was a sixth grade middle school teacher in Denver when I was out here. There was a school, Our Lady of Lourdes, which reminds me a lot of St Teresa. It's the same kind of grade. And it was one of our schools that was in Denver was kind of struggling with not badly. But Archbishop Sheffield was, he was kind of frustrated because the school kept losing students. Enrollment was going down. And so Rosemary was teaching English in middle school. And so I said, why don't you make Rosemary, she was 29 at the time, why don't you make Rosemary he knew her, make Rosemary the principal. And he said, what? What do you have to lose? And and she's just acting quite patient. And so she went to Lourdes and implemented a practical education, and the school completely turned around. There was another school, the next parish over, the school had closed about 10 years before. They reopened that school. south. So there's these two flourishing schools that are really because of her vision and she didn't have any background in Catholic classics or anything like that. She was an English teacher. She went to the University of Colorado in Boulder. So she didn't have any kind of class, but it was flourishing. Some people ask the question, what about the students? If they go through an education like this, how will they do in either standardized tests, or how do they do going into Pius, or how do they do going to college? And I think a great example is Claire Oldenburg. So Claire Oldenburg just graduated from Pius. And some of you may know that she had the outstanding senior grade. Her mom and dad, Dan and Monica, went to the University of Dallas, and they were students of mine when I was chaplain in Bruce Gnarls, and the chaplain there now. But when I was chaplain, they were the students. I ended up having their way. They both went to Creighton. He went to Creighton Law School. She went to Creighton Medical School. Now they living in Pueblo most of their life. And Claire went to a small classical academy in Colorado, in Pueblo. And when they moved to Lincoln, and Monica took a job, they had to get out of Pueblo because marijuana was legalized and talking crazy foresters. But they moved in, and so Claire went in as a freshman Pius. And so she went through Pius, and like I said, got 36 on her ACT. She got a full-ride scholarship to Hillsdale, and she's going to major in physics. She's majoring in physics. She wants to work for NASA. That's her desire. But it's interesting. I was talking to her dad today. So I'm going to give this talk. I use you as an example. I say, yeah, sure. Please play. I said, well, why do you think she does well? She's not necessarily like high IQ. And how do you think? Why did she do so well on her ACT? He said, well, what's interesting? She told me that when she took the ACT, she read every question twice and finished the exam in 40 minutes. And he thinks it was her reading comprehension. She was able to read through that really quickly, read it again, come up with the answer. And he said the reason because she's been reading since she was like this big. And she can read fast and comprehend fast. And that's part of this education, is to have all of these skills of reading. My time is up. And I know one more thing. So I took the seminarians down to Clear Creek Abbey, which is this abbey. So 4 of our new deacons who were ordained last week, and 1 of our new priests, and 2 of our seminarians, third-year guys. And I was in a conversation with one of the monks who was a classmate of mine at Creighton. He was here ahead of me in this same humanity group. He's a conference. But he was telling me that one of our other classmates is the superintendent of schools in Tulsa, and they are going. All the schools are going towards the classical education. All the schools in Tulsa. Oklahoma City is posting a position for a new superintendent of schools, and one of the requirements is that they have some sort of background in liberal arts, work with this. And I know I was going to say this. I knew there was something I forgot. I was talking about this. This organization, by the way, is booming. So many, the Diocese of Marquette went up to a total liberal education. Now it's a small, they only have 9 schools. But, I was going to say about some people think this is just for sort of an elite group of students. Mary Beth Donahue, who used to be the executive director of this organization, she now is the executive director of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops Committee on Education. So she is the top executive in Washington for Bishops Committee on Education. and she used to be the executive director of this organization, and she used to be the head. She was the principal of a school in Washington, D.C., in high school called St. Jerome's. St. Jerome's is 95% African American, and it went totally over to a classical curriculum. And I use that example, and it's in the hood. It's deep in the hood. This kind of education, and it's lifted up these kids and these families in high school. So it's, I'm just using that example that it's not an elitist, it's very inclusive to minorities. So that anyone can learn. So anyway, I'm done with my time, but thank you for your attention, and as you can see, I'm kind of excited about this, and we'll have some time for Q&A. So.
So now I'd like to introduce Deacon Matt Hecker, who has not even been at so very fresh. And so he was ordained at the same time as two of our newly ordained deacons too. So English Shade Creole and Tony Sugar. So the Lord's a big development. So Hecker has been helping navigate our schools in so many different fronts. And as you know, it's been the most challenging school years on so many fronts. And so behind the scenes, making so many decisions and so many ways of keeping our schools thriving and operating and doing well. And so when things were when to start up our school year last fall, you recall, there's so many questions. I mean, are you open school? Part-time, half-time, whatever. And Deacon Hecker did make the decision that he wants our schools in Lincoln to at least be in full-time. And where other schools were going to start hybrid and these types of things. And we would just see how it played out. Maybe we would meet for a week, or a month, or a quarter. And thanks be to God, now we can say that we've been in school with a particular protocol, scholastic school, all year long, thanks be to God. So Deacon Hecker had a huge part in that, and very gracious for your leadership there. And just like you to kind of see a little bit, or explain a little bit more of why this Catholic liberal orientation, why does St. Jesus seem like
Thank you, Father Conley. Let's hope this never again repeated that last academic year. That was awful. Just saying. But that said, we got to the end, and we stayed open, and it's a beautiful thing, right? And we graduated with all 6 of our high schools this year. Many, many blessings. But that's because, not anything I said, it's because, as I communicated to our schools back in the summer, we're going to lift God's cause. And we're going to gather under the banner of Christ and put our trust in Him rather than the Centers for Disease Control or anything else. And we did. And God rewarded it. And so thanks be to God that we did have a great year. But on the sort of batting cleanup front, a couple of follow-up questions for you, Bishop. Do you believe I said something about the lyrics of Grateful Dead music? And back in the 1970s, I didn't think the Grateful Dead lyrics really kind of were a thing. It's sort of just out in the field and listening to the Grateful Dead. And nobody knew the lyrics. Or cared. And then the other question, on a follow-up, Bishop, you talked about a Strauss waltz. Were any of those Strauss waltzes something along the lines of rock, shock, jazz? The real reason this was probably So, of course, the story of basketball program is in Kansas. Very good reason to be proud of. What's old is new, right? classical education, liberal education is not new. It's quite old. It literally goes back to the ancients, the Greeks and the Romans. This isn't new. Catholic education was education for centuries. There weren't public schools. The public schools actually modeled themselves after the Catholic schools because they thought they needed a way to educate their kids because we were doing such a good job educating ours. And in the course of events, particularly after the introduction of the liberal or progressive school of thought in the early 1900s, John Dewey's system, we shifted the model of education. We shifted it away from a faith-based model and an understanding of the person created in the image and likeness of God to a thing that we needed to teach. Fundamentally, that is the difference between the public system and the Catholic system. They see our children, and I understand I'm a product of that system too, as young people that need to be taught so they can learn how to live. We see education as the ultimate end of our education. It's not to graduate students to be successful. The ultimate end of our education is, are our kids in heaven? That's what we do. The culture is a mess. You don't need our testimony to that. You see it yourselves. We have, for a long time, had this sort of adaptation of the public school curriculum. We baptized it in a sense and called it Catholic. It works. Our schools are good. There's not a thing wrong with our schools. They are very successful. So why mess with that? It's not messing with the model of success. It's shifting back to the philosophy of children in the image and likeness of God, who have been given the capacity to wonder and reason and to see and understand God, in order that they may better know Him, love Him, serve Him in this life, and be with Him forever in the next. That's our mission. Liberal education, as it's been for centuries, has worked very, very successfully. The push to reintegrate it is really not so much on our own initiative as it is a reaction to what's happening in the culture, which we need to react to. Right? The culture is pushing us in a very, very different direction than we want to go as people today. And that culture very much is toxic because it's not just what happens in your time when you have your kids in your house or when we have our kids in our schools. It's what happens in the times outside of that. Right? This thing pervades their world. How do we counter this? We counter this by teaching not what to think, how to think. How to argue, how to make a distinction about what is truly authentically good, what is truly truth. That there is an objective truth and we can know it. That's the answer. It's not to be better at the public schools. It's to return to who we are. That's the framework. This is not meant to be a top-down decision or directive telling you, you have to do this. That's not this at all. And I'm sorry if that came out in any kind of communication, because that's not what this is. This is an invitation to St Teresa's parish to consider participation in this program. We'd like to pilot a couple programs. St. James and Creek has already been doing this foundational work to bring their community into this. So they're a little bit ahead. We asked Father Hodney Sister Mary Cecilia, to spend some time this year doing the same thing. Faculty, staff, students, families, bringing you up to speed on what this model looks like, why it might be good. Why St. Keys? Well, I'll give you two reasons. One, I really very much believe that we need to start this model in our schools that are led by school sisters and Christians. When you think about who they are school sisters of Christ. They're the right people to lead this. Much of this came out of a framework of religious in our schools when we had that wealth of luxury. We're one of the few dioceses in the nation that still has a fairly good luxury in that regard, as Bishop said earlier. And the school sisters, I'd like to empower them to show us the way back, so to speak. So we're looking at schools that are led by school sisters. Second, and I will share with you a personal anecdote. I'm going to call out my colleague, Nathan Sager. Nathan, sorry to put you on the spot. I promise that it'll be good. Those of you who may know that Nathan came to the Lincoln Diocese a year ago from Iowa City. And I was in conversation with Nathan before he came to Lincoln. They were looking, Nathan and Catherine looking to relocate the family. Right? That's a daunting task anytime. It's an even more daunting task during COVID. I think awful, right? Because we're all shut down. Social life is. So what I told him, I will share with you. Our kids are grown. Our youngest is 25, soon to be 26, I guess, this year. We came to town. We moved to St. Joseph's Parish in 2003. I told Nathan if I had to do it again, I knew then what I knew now. I would move my parents. I would have moved my family into St. Teresa. And I encouraged him to look at this. I hope it was good.
Good advice.
Why? Because you're one of the best examples of Catholic community that I've ever seen. It's beautiful to watch what you do and what you have here. And that kind of community is critically important to the success of a program like this. You have to have that kind of level of friendship, involvement, interaction with each other. You have to be in it together. And I love St. Joseph's Parish, and I'm glad I'm there, but we don't have it together. It's a beautiful thing to drive by on J Street on Sunday morning and see families walking hand in hand to Mass. I'll share you another story this is a good story, but it's so key to the life of your parish and school. I had a gentleman call my office, it would have been last summer, and he said, well, no, it would have been last spring. He called and said, I just need to ask you something. He was from out of state. They're looking to move to Lincoln. They're Catholic, kids in school. And he said, we drove by St. Teresa's school. And we saw a group of kids walking out of the church, praying the rosary, happy and smiling, joyful. Honest to God, this was his question. Did you know I was coming? No, I have no idea who you are. That's authentic. That's who this parish is. That's why St. Keys. Right? I know I need to stop. need to answer questions. The last thing I want you to know, to hear me say, is this is indeed an invitation. It's done in hand. It's an invitation for you to explore and look deeper into this and decide collectively as a Christian community, is this for you? You think you see yourself doing this? And if so, then we invite this opportunity to continue this journey with you and use St. Teresa's as a model for others, because I don't think it will take very long. And in fact, I've already had phone calls from people outside of St. Peter's Parish saying, can we get in on this too? I had a mom from David City call me. They asked that very thing. I heard this was happening. Can we do it? So, but it has to be your decision. You have to own this and you have to want this. So I'm going to stop there because I know you have questions. Father, how do you, Sister Mary, she said you have some thoughts that they want to share too with you. But I don't want anyone to leave here this evening thinking you don't get a chance to answer, we don't get a chance to answer your questions, or that you feel like this is something that the Bishop and I have imposed on St. Teresa's, because that is not the case. So let's stop there and ask for any questions. Yes. Yeah.
Greg Coffey, graduated at St. Teresa since my 26-year-old daughter from kindergarten, so that's been about 20 years. And I've still got more to go. So, over the years, I've gone through a lot of back to school learnings. And every year, it seems like there's new discipline procedures that we implement. This year it's going to be the parents, because whatever we did last year. And this year we're going to do the ABC program. We're going to teach people that teaching democracy. And what we did last year, it's like Kevin Neal and that Saturday Night Live sketch. We were grabbing straws. This year is the one. And it seemed like it was whatever the new fad kind of discipline program was going to be, was what we were going to implement, and it would work for a year or two, and then we realized it's not perfect, these kids aren't perfect, and we need to do something different. I've read the email that came out. I've listened to Bishop and you talk about what Catholic political education needs to do. But what I haven't heard is what in practical terms it means for us. Okay, what does this mean? I mean, look, when you say that we're going to teach classical liberal education, how is that going to change the curriculum? Does it just mean that we're going to have students memorizing poems? I mean, it doesn't seem like a big change. I mean, they don't memorize a lot of poems now, and it's not going to take a lot of work to get them to memorize stuff. I can do that at home. So what does it mean, practically speaking? How is it going to change the curriculum? What is it going to do for our kids? Great question.
Father, sister, you want to start that? We already have a lot of this in schools. This isn't some radical shift in most of our schools. We're already incorporating elements of this kind of education and thought training. So we start out in a little bit different place than just ground zero.
I think there will be there's not going to be a huge shift in some areas. You're going to see a big change in some of the quality of the literature that we use. Some of the things that we have in our basal textbooks are not quality literature. And the teachers sometimes feel like they have to use that because that's what's provided for them. This is going to give them the freedom to be able to choose that which is good, true, and beautiful, and teach the children to recognize that, so that then when they go to read on their own, they see those qualities. They're going to become more articulate in how they discuss literature, how they discuss history, how they discuss, even how they discuss math. If you can figure that out, we're still going to be figuring that out next year. Strong emphasis on younger grades phonics, handwriting, just writing in general, being able to be articulate in how we express ourselves, both written orally, and how we present ourselves physically, how we manage ourselves within a society, with our physical. We may bring Latin into the school. Those are still things that, as a faculty, we're going to be discussing and exploring this year to see what resources we have and we are excited about. There are things we already do that emphasize the good, true people, and those things are not going to go away at all. They're just going to be emphasized and brought out and made more beautiful so that everyone can notice them even more. Does that kind of help?
Sorry.
And the thing is that I'll tell you, the faculty, we don't have all the answers. And that's why we're going to have a year to really delve into the study ourselves and figure out what it is that we have that's worth saving and what it is that we really have that is not going to be sustainable because it's not, in its essence, good, true, and beautiful. And we've tried to mask it by making it that way. But it's not good, true, and beautiful. So that's what we need to get to as a faculty. And it's going to change. I saw you doing that.
So will you still be doing math expressions, and will you be using the Wonders books? And if not, where are the curriculum materials that come from? Because I think you usually get them from the public school, so that's kind of my question of like, where are these things going to come from?
So, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. Math expressions may be the best series out there that we're going to go for. It may not be, because I'll be honest, I want what's best for your children. Not what is just good and good enough, but I want what's best for your children. And if math expressions and Wonders is not it, we're not going to use those, and we'll find a way. There are schools that, this Catholic Institute for Catholic World Education, they are willing to help walk us through this and provide those, book lists that we can then use. We have some of those things already in place in our school, and the teachers use them bits and pieces instead of really delving into them and really exploring them. We sometimes read through them quickly because we want to make sure that this gets covered and this gets covered and this gets covered, and we're pretty sure we're covering everything a mile wide and an inch deep instead of really going into it and seeing what it is that's beautiful and bringing that out so that our children can really learn that, so that when they encounter everything in society that I'm not encountering because I'm not out there in the world, that they can figure out how to recognize the good and the evil in there, reject the evil and embrace the good, and move forward and bring everybody else with them. Because that's really what we want. We want them to get to heaven, and we want them to take everything they know with them to heaven too. So that's a good question. I don't know if Wonders is going to be the series. I can guarantee you that I bet Mrs. Sullivan in 4th grade is not going to use the first story in her Wonders book. That's what we did a little exercise as a faculty. Yes.
When we left this class from father and sister, it was, we discussed it, it was today, Bishop called it glitch. Team Hector calls it. We're inviting, which is it? Which one are we? Are we doing it? Are we being invited to the other parts?
I think it's still an invitation.
Next, if we decide, this is good, sister, or
If we collectively do this next year, decide this not what we'll do.
it's an ongoing
stick with what we
discussion.
have.
To the year.
Yeah, it's not like today, after that, every day.
Okay.
When I'm talking with the faculty, we're still developing all of these things that if we choose not to go this route, we're gonna learn a lot about what we as teachers need to do. Yes.
Can you give any numbers or statistics about how well it's been implemented in our school? Maybe out of
I don't have this off the top of my head. I know that there is some in here, so if you wanted to pick up a book, copy of the book. Or if you go to the Institute for Catholic Education, their website, they have links to studies that have those statistics on it, but I don't have those in my mind.
So I know some of the really trying to get attention about federal education. They're really care more
or intense training to really know how to teach well. And I was talking to her a little bit about it. It's very difficult to implement well if you don't have teachers that are trained really well. Our teachers are great teachers, but they're training from the system that we all very traditionally. So my concern is the implementation of it. I think the concept is beautiful. I'm concerned about the implementation of it and the speed of the training forward. And I know you talked about returning this next year, but it's going to work out and video power and not so much concerning components. I mean, where are they in the certain process?
That's a good question, Teresa. I don't have all these answers. But I can guarantee that, as Bishop mentioned, Rosemary in Denver, she had no training in this. And she can jump in, and her teachers had no training in this. And she brought this to life. It does take work. And it takes work on the part of families, but it also takes work on the part of teachers. And we're going to be doing things this year. I'm going to be finding subs and working with curriculum development with these teachers and that kind of stuff. As far as the parents, a lot of it's going to have to be reading and studying and discerning on your own or in groups. Praying about it and asking the Lord, where do you really want St. Teresa's to go? Because ultimately, this is his school. These are his kids. You are his families in this parish.
Just a quick answer to also this, and I think there's a place in all of this for active engagement. So, let me say that again. I think there's a place in this very much for active engagement of parents. So as you work through this journey collectively as a school and parish community, it'll be really important to have that kind of input, feedback, reflection, prayer. Those points are part of the invitation to consider this. And I would very much want to see you do that. I know that's what St. James and Creed did that very thing. So they spent a year basically engaging in the conversation, faculty, staff, parents, parish, working through what does this look like, why do we think it's a good idea, what are the pitfalls, the pitfalls. And a large part of this, people are scared by the terminology classical, the terminology liberal, or the difference in the curriculum and what that means, and how that shifts the model of the school. But almost without fail, those people who do get into this say, this is really good. And Rosemary is a very good example of that. I think she would be the first to tell you she would never mind that. Back in the minute.
Okay, so you mentioned this Rosemary in Denver where it seems to be flourishing. Tell us how many places it's failed or it's just doing about the same as what they replaced.
You know, that is a question I wouldn't answer off the top of my head. But I can tell you, that we get a lot of chatter about, Sacred Heart School had that here in town, and it didn't work for them. And I would counter that with saying, that wasn't what the problem was in Sacred Heart School. It wasn't their curriculum. The financial model, unfortunately, just was not sustainable. And so the curriculum could, finances, not so much. But an answer, more direct answer to your question, I think the question is not so easy to answer because it's not so easy to identify the reasons why. Is it a lack of buy-in by the faculty? Is it a lack of financial resource commitment by the school or the group that's doing it? Or the inability to recruit others to that model? Because so many of these aren't like this, a diocesan parish school. Many of them are standalone private academies. that start and perhaps don't make it. So that's why I don't have the answer to your question. It's hard to know the reasons because those don't come out in the literature. But it's a very good question nevertheless.
I make one comment to that. I know I've been on the board of this organization for 10 years, and I know when I first started, it was very small, and now it's exploded. Meaning that they are doing conferences and consultation with schools all over the United States now. And they said that the desire for this kind of education is exploding. And had to double their staff and have to continue to grow. So I know there's a great interest in it. I don't know how many of those failed. I don't know that.
I had no idea what the title was meant, but let them be born in wonder, and so I Googled and found that. And the first thing that popped up was churchtalk.com, and it was highlighting how this idea, this program, the humanities program that you spoke to me and involved in, Bishop, got shut down after 9 years because of Catholic conversion. I wondered if you might speak to that a bit. I clearly see maybe that's a kind of failure. I'm interested. How do you counter if that just because it ran up against public ideological
There are a couple of things. I mean, there were the professors themselves were not all Catholic, so they didn't realize there was so many conversions, but there were over 300 conversions in the 10-year period, and a number of us went off to priests. So the university, there was my classmate, Katie Gaines, her dad was a Unitarian minister. The American Civil Liberties Union was Defense League, Jews filed a suit against the University of Kansas for violation of Church of State, because they thought the professors were teaching religion in the state institution. And so there were these hearings at the union with the professors, and made the program even more popular. But they found that there was no evidence of that. The professors were all had received the highest awards for teaching, but the Hope Award, which is won out by students. There was no evidence of any kind of possibility. So, but what really kind of what they did is we call it death by administration. So remember I said how not being there satisfied with English, Western student speech, but they took that as a all elective. So you had to take it as an elective. Well, when you take it as elective, students, they only get the credits. So that, and also professors were on years, and so after about 10 years, one retired because he was over 70, and one had a heart attack, and then the other one kept going into the 80s, early 90s, but the conversions were really hard. It was too successful. But Kevin, Jeff?
Yeah, I was just going to speak a little bit on the positive. I've seen a lot of these kids that Rebecca talks about who leave. And a lot of it is dealing with argumentation, becomes emotivism when they get out of our system. And I would like to see logic from the Tribune. I'd like to see rhetoric come in. I'd like to see Latin come in for all the reasons you gave. Also, this is the time kids learn language well, and Latin gives them a good base for so many other languages. I was really bothered with the way we stepped off, and I much prefer what's happening tonight as a starting point. But I would like to see us systematize that where there is a way we can discuss these things like this and get feedback. It's not so much a question, but I would back up that I think our kids do need some of this.
Yeah.
Yes, gentlemen, check.
Our question was, what would LPS's involvement be in our school? Because a lot of our students, our family, rely on IEPs both for either behavioral or learning disabilities. And is this something that's going to push them farther into the margins of the community rather than lifting them up? Because that's something we're talking about, overcoming, cultural obstacles. And this sounds really great, but a practical way to help lift our children up rather than they don't fit into this model, so they're just going to fall away. We don't want that to happen. And we'd really like to know is LPS going to be pushed out, because our kids really rely on those IEPs to succeed.
LPS will still be involved in our school. They have the obligation to work with students who are in need with IEPs and such, especially with their child find and working with those who are in speech for articulation and things like that. We will be working with them to make sure that everything is cohesive and not isolated or we don't want to create separatism in the school with those who have to be served with IEPs and those who don't. For the most part, our students integrate so well. Our resource team has really worked hard to make that happen, and they will continue to work hard for that. Are we equipped to be able to serve every student? No. And that's the game. There are students who have issues that we may not be able to serve. And those will be discussed in dialogue with families and not just that, sorry, you're out type of thing. I mean, it's discussed. There are students who have needs that we may not be able to serve.
And that's not
me.
That just has to do with student needs.
Right.
But to answer your question, it's really, I appreciate your question. It illustrates a really excellent point. LPS, this isn't their program. It's not their money. These are federal dollars. These dollars do not belong to LPS. These dollars belong to your students. That's who they belong to. They are not LPS dollars. Imperial law.
Right.
In law. In action, it becomes that way because everything has to go through what the law calls the local education agency. So it's got to go through the public schools because it can't come directly to private sectarian schools. But the dollars are earmarked for these students. Meaning that LPS, it's flipping. LPS is obligated to work with these students regardless. That's their role because those dollars belong to those students. The answer.
Let the white do that.
I was just, Mr. Shakers, I just prespoke, but anyway, I was going to say, at our last faculty meeting, I was freaking out, okay? I think all the teachers were. Because I am always proud of my school. I've taught a lot of your children, and I watch them go up, and when I read the pious announcements at the end of the year about who got this award, who's doing this program, I am so proud. I'm like, I got that one, and that one, and that one, and I really am. So I'm like, what are you gonna do to our school? We're doing a great job here. But I took the book that Sister gave us, and I read it front to cover to the back, and I sat there and I said, I see what they're saying in this book. I like the thoughts that are in this book. As a teacher, I'm like, it's a lot of work though, because we're so used to having a curriculum that we follow, that we have this curriculum, you follow it, you go through the year. By the end of the year, I'm like, I look at my kids, I'm like, we covered everything, they know most of this, they'll get the rest as they move on, and we're doing great. And that curriculum is very different. And as a teacher, I will have to learn how to teach that curriculum. So it's more learning for me. I was really kind of excited. As I'm reading this, I'm like, oh, I've always wanted to learn that. Oh, I've always wanted to learn that. But I've always had to teach according to the way I was taught how we're supposed to learn. And I know all the teachers were like, I can't believe you're saying that, because I was like, I am not doing classical learning. We are not doing that at our school. It has such really good base. They They just want your kids to be able to live in this crazy world, to think for themselves, to find God in the end. Because I know a lot of my relatives, they have gone the way of the world, and I pray for them every day. I want my kids to stay holy, and it's going to be hard. And this just teaches them to think logically according to Christ and his thoughts so that they can make it in the world. So when they see people wear the pride flag or whatever, they love the person, God created them, they're unique and holy, but Christ says this is the truth and we have to follow it. And to be able to stand up and say, this is the truth. I love you, I'm going to pray for you. So anyway, my husband, I have to have him read the book. It's just a lot of work, and as teachers, we too are really worried because I got to have the scope and sequence. All right, we're going to sit down in kindergarten, they're learning this, this, and this, and this, and this, and this. And it's going to build on a first grade. And so I look at that and think, oh my gosh, we have all this work to do. We've got to get started. And sister said we might implement it, and it's just a lot of work. So we were freaking out. So if it's like you said, this is just something to think about. Delve into it. I really think everybody should read that book. It gives you a whole idea of what it is. And then after you read that book, think about it. So anyway.
Can you briefly summarize the scope and sequence? Because I think that's something a lot of people are hungry for.
I think the problem is, like sister said, everybody's gonna read the book, and then they have an outline of what kids learn at this age and whatever. So then what we have to do is, because I've been online, I was researching, there are different academies out there that you can look into. One, this Colby Academy I was looking at, it actually has like a scope and sequence they've got out, it's a homeschool thing. So I'm looking at them like, oh, I could do that. It had a little preschool thing, and it taught what they taught, and you could buy stuff from them, and even worksheets. I'm like, okay, I feel a little more comfortable. So we can invent our own. Oh my gosh, I've been teaching for 20 years. I have invented worksheets a lot. It's just much easier if you have them ready because it's a lot of work to be a teacher. Plus we have a family and children, and we love your kids like they're ours. Trust me. Every child, like Bishop said, you have this relationship. And at the end of the year, just look at their little faces and they've grown up, and we love your kids, we really do. I mean, I wouldn't be teaching for this many years if I didn't. So anyway, so I think that's the problem is we as a faculty, we have to sit down, and then like Bishop said, then we bring the parents and say, now this is what we're thinking. And so it's all open, so we're not going to hold it. And we have to learn too, and we have to pray to God to help us learn Western civilization, whatever happens. But it's stuff that's really unique and really interesting. So I don't know if that answers your question. I don't know if we have to sit down and think about it, and we can figure it out. So.
I think one of the experiences I've had with this type of curriculum, which I really like, is the fact that it's not compartmentalized. You don't sit and do science and then sit and do history. Your literature is involving religion, it's involving history, it's involving your purpose in life, and I just feel like it's, for the child, it just seems more cohesive and more of a vision for who we want them to be. It's a little harder to stick math in there, maybe it was for me anyway, but it doesn't mean math doesn't get taught. You do have a curriculum for that. And I really think for my kids, it really was well-rounded. And the thing with the teachers, I do think that it's a challenge, but I don't think it's too difficult. Lots of moms have done it in their living rooms that don't have a teaching degree, and it's not easy. But I just wanted to answer to that too, that yeah, our teachers definitely can manage this, and it will be work, but I think it might be worth it. So.
Andrea, over here. So you mentioned that we're divided and engaged in this if we want. How is it going to be implemented potentially in the future at Pius or across other schools? Part of the thought process I have with this is that I got to spend a week at Thomas Aquinas. I saw how they did master's geometry there. It's highly formalized, very truth-based, and obviously that may not come in until later grade levels, but that transition from say, middle school, high school, if it's radically different, it's challenging student. So is there an expectation of that kind of cross or teaching style we should all at high school level or is there grades?
Yes. That is the expectation. Bishop and I talked about creating a track within Black's High School. So it wouldn't be a separate high school kind of experience for classical education. But it would incorporate it within the curriculum that is their class. We already have a group of teachers that are excited about doing this. We looked at it, but do you do class down, or do you do grade school up? And those are things like grade school up is the better way to do it. Much more organic and natural way to do that. And the idea is that they will spread. And that's what we're calling a pilot program, and that's the reason we want to pilot it and see how it works. We think St. Teresa's is a good place to do a pilot program if you agree. It's still your city. So that's the idea.
The technology curriculum, I haven't seen from this program how different that might be and what we're currently experiencing. Is there anything that you should
There are many different views on how technology implements or impacts development of education. There are those who say absolutely no technology in the school, and there are those who say we're going to have to use technology. We're not going to get rid of the technology that we have. What we're going to do is we evaluate the use of it, and in all honesty, those phones that you have in your hands and the iPads and things that you give to your kids at home. I mean, I'll speak on behalf of the teachers here because we've had some discussions on this, especially fifth grade on how they do not do a service for your kids. They really don't. Because I know that you want them to have a way to communicate with you when they're not in your presence. But it's opening up a whole world to them that you can't monitor. And what we want to do is we want to teach them how to use the technology tools appropriately for research to be able to support what's good, true, and new. That's really what we're doing. While teaching them how to type, while teaching them how all these things come together so that they have the tools that they need as they go on. We're not going to say no technology because we're going to expect everybody else to get that phone. Not everybody has that phone.
Do we have support to refine the technology to use it as curriculum?
Yes.
Because
It's
as an engineer, I would say iPads are not.
No, within the parameters that the education technology has devices, and we will work with them to figure out what we need here to make this move.
I was just going to say that parents are supposed to be primary educators of their children. We'll also need a fair amount of support as we try to continue the work that's being done in the school day and get ourselves up to speed. And I always love a challenge. I am never afraid to fail something new. So, bring it on.
Yes.
This is kind of a practical question. Great awesome. I am Jeff with the Parish Council. And I took the liberty to contact that study because I didn't know what are the practical implications of it. I can't remember exactly what I talked to them and what these numbers, but well, from the information I got, it's trying to really cost. Well, I was told that in a school that was founded specifically for Catholic girl education about 10 years ago, in that school of 72 students, the first year budget planned creating $20,000. And so my question is, have we put a figure on that we're budgeting for this year? And considering this is a pilot program, can we expect any sort of subsidization in the level? That's a big number for us.
Oh, yeah, these funding. Right. So one of the really interesting silver linings of our was the emergency assistance to non-public schools funding. And it came with none of the streams typically attached to federal funding, because it actually comes to us from the feds. It came to us from the government. So we were able to distance ourselves from many of the streams that we would not otherwise be able to accept. So good news is we actually have a funding source that we couldn't have known a year ago at this time. And I don't remember the exact funding number. What was your?
For each one, we had $290,000. And if you're wondering, we're gonna have a counselor in the school for a couple of days. We're gonna have an additional interventionist in the school. We're gonna update some of our access points and stuff like that. So it is being used that, the first round. The second round is what we're looking at.
Congress has already passed the legislation for EAMS. They just haven't articulated how it's going to play out. So we're waiting for that to happen. So there is some relief. It's not all on the parents. And on the other side, the other part of your questions, I am, as I told Father Hodge, Sister Mary Cecilia, and the conversation that Bishop and I had, we are fully aware of some of the financial impacts on St. T's School. I don't know what the answer is, but we are not going to let St. T's School fail. That is a promise. So you may adopt this curriculum, you may not, but St. T's School has to be in place. We're not closing the door.
Yes, ma'am.
I'll try to be brief because I'm going to chat. I'm Carol Seekers, I work here at St. T's. I'm a paraprofessional. I am a certified teacher, and I also work with Title III English language learners after school. And that money is federal money, again, that is funneled through Lincoln Public. The only person I have to answer to in the way I do my job after school, with paychecks coming through Lincoln Public, is to Sister Mary Cecilia. I don't have to answer to LPS at all. Furthermore, at least two of the LPS special education teachers who come here are Catholic. It's like getting free teachers here. They ask to be itinerant special education teachers rather than have the convenience of their own classrooms, because they like being at St. Teresa's. They like climbing 54 steps. And a couple of other things. I am, among other things, I'm a world language teacher. I have taught Spanish. And I always try to bring, and some of the buzzwords, I know somebody was talking about how things come and go. And like, that was so last year. We're on to this year. In the public schools, it's relevance, rigor, and relationship. To build relationships with our students, to make what the learning that they're doing relevant, and to make it rigorous. Well, this school already does a marvelous job. So much so that I've got goosebumps right now, because I have 2 little grandsons, 2 who live in Maine and 1 who lives here, and I pray every day that my 2, they'll be 3 in September, that my little grandson is allowed to come here. I'm only his grandmother, I'm not his parents. His parents are divorced, unfortunately. And the father, my son, says, Mom, if I am anything, I am Catholic. But he is not now a practicing Catholic. However, he has a liberal arts college education. So does another daughter. They were English majors. Okay? He teaches at a local public high school, and he teaches the upper level English, creative writing, AP. He used to coach debate, and we just happened to be running some errands today, and he was telling me about how grateful he was that he had a liberal arts education, and he is concerned about what will be available for his own child down the road. And he knows that I would love for him to come here. And he says, I want him to have a liberal arts education. I want him to see, and to imagine, his word was to have a sense of curiosity. He didn't say imagination, but he said curiosity. And furthermore, I think he taught 1 year in Omaha. I think this is his 10th year here in Lincoln, 9th or 10th. And he says, Mom, we teachers can tell the kids that have come out of the Lincoln Catholic schools. You can spot them. They're better students. They have better study skills. And incorporating Latin is, to me, is a no-brainer in this whole thing because it makes learning English easier. It makes them better English students. It makes them better writers. It makes them better at learning multiple different languages. And the time to get those kids is not in high school. It's the little guys, because they just pick up on things like gangbusters. And I also am a member of Sacred Heart Parish, and it broke my heart. And I didn't even have any grandchildren at that time. It broke my heart that Sacred Heart School closed. But we shouldn't assume that school failed, because those children are now in high school. Those are the same students who the public school teachers are doing extremely well and carrying on. I wish it was still in existence. I mean, it really does break my heart. But I trust that those two women there, who I believe, hear my description of the School Sisters of Christ the King. My description is those women did not choose to become consecrated sisters because they couldn't do anything else or they couldn't get a date. Let's be honest. Okay, let's be honest. Because they couldn't get a date. Because they wouldn't have made decent homemakers. Whatever. These women chose to do this, and these are the kind of women who could run any 500 Fortune 500 company. And that's the kind of women who are instrumental in helping us learn how to do whatever we need to do here. And so I guess I know that Sister Mary Cecilia, also Sister Mary Agnes, and Sister Mary Gabriel, who's not here tonight, they are not going to let anything come into St. Teresa's that would not be good for your children and hopefully my grandson.
I have a couple questions. The first one is, with moving to this, if we decided to move to this model, St. Teresa's decided to adopt it, which it sounds like it's still up for negotiation. If we did, and it's the only one in Lincoln that has that, are kids from all other parishes allowed to sign up to go here? Because now St. Teresa's has this, and Dr. Rick even mentioned, he's getting calls from others. And so people from other schools would like to come here. Is this a step towards kind of divorcing the school away from the parish? And then second, as it relates, because Dr. Hager, you commented on why we had to do it over again. We did come to St. Teresa's because we have a beautiful community here that you haven't seen necessarily in other places. And I think right now it's been a rough couple of years, and there's a lot of brokenness in our community. And I feel like we're still trying to become a community with all of our new families from Sacred Heart and St. Mary's. COVID did nothing to bring us together as a community. We still don't even know those pieces of our community. And so now if we're opening up to people from all over the Lincoln that want to come, what does that do for our community? Or is it not even allowed?
Yeah, I don't think we made a definitive decision on that. And here's why. Because we're still new in this process. And that's a step. For months later, we decided on implementation and time frame for implementation. And then once you bought into that, yes, you do. Then we can have conversations like that. But I would tell you, just in general, sort of how I would approach that. This is St. Teresa's parish, I think St. Teresa's school. If you have open seats for certain grades, sure, yeah, that's a good thing, open seats, fine, but not to either exclude anybody from St. T's or to overwhelm St. T's. This is your parish, this is your school. The idea is actually to get other people to like it so much they start in the school. That's as making this the only one. Yeah. St. Peter's is thinking about it. I know several other schools have already contacted me about, hey, we maybe, so there is.
Yes. To kind of go off what you said, what I like, I mean, I like a lot of things about St. Teresa's, but what I like are the smaller or with controlled class sizes. So to kind of elaborate on that, I would be concerned if that was allowed, because then, number one, the teachers are gonna be overwhelmed, and number two, our students are going to have the individualized part of what I appreciate.
Yes, I would agree. Yeah, there's certainly.
And there's only so much room.
So there's a balance between the quality of education and the financial sustainability of that, and what does that look like. Maintaining that balance, that equilibrium will be really paramount importance. Now, hey, how many students can we stuff in the third year?
I just have a question about the it sounds like when I'm hearing this is something that's been a starting process for you, and maybe sister also all year. And yet communication does just happen in what, April, the end of the year. So to move forward with this, what kind of assurance can we have that there's going to be better communication among the administration to the parents on an ongoing basis instead of just an always on or a surprise and we don't even know what all of a sudden the things are said for us. And also, along with that, keeping the parish apprised of what's going on, because I kind of feel like we're separating the parish and the schools. I've seen that more and more at the parish that are involved and they used to have volunteers. And I know last year was actually different, but we used to have parishioners very engaged and involved in the school, and I've seen that dwindle. So on top of the communication, communicating our parishioners, they support this school. And so it's really important that they're engaged in it.
So, with regard to that engagement, that is something we need to work on better, and that is something that we're gonna look at things and, okay, what are going to be some of those steps that we're going to have more of, having more of that conversation. And so, that's something we're looking at for that. And so, one of the things would be is if we had just groups that would study this, we could have discussion about this is a really good start. Because it talks about the theoretical and philosophical, but then it goes into an actual teacher and career experience in the classroom and things like this. And so it starts getting a bigger picture, if you will, of why this can be so good. So, we'll be here.
Could be more practical. Set up task force that include commissioners, small family parents, and you as a sister, so that we can work together to make sure that everybody is informed, knows where the discussion is going, regular emails can be sent out, this is kind of what's wanted, here's some resources for you, you want to look into them, and an ongoing communication system that involves commissioners, parish, family, or school families, and those instructors. So I have possibility to do that.
Sure. those are all good ideas, and this is being filmed tonight, so we'll be putting this on like our school webpage and things like that, because there were some people vacationing, things like that, that wanted to come so they could. So yeah, those are all very good things, because we already have a good sense of even the different specifics we're going to be going about with teachers and different ways, how does that look, et cetera. So, yeah, I mean, the parish should have more of a sense of okay, what are the steps and that sort of thing. So, that's very good. And from my own educational background, born and raised in Lincoln, and my parents were members of St. Joseph's before they had a actual school and church. And so I remember pre-kindergarten going to, sometimes it was the LPAC in Pius, and sometimes it was actually in lunchroom at Lincoln East High School. And so it's just interesting to have this community that's forming. And so since we didn't have a school when I was going to kindergarten, I went to Maine Morley's, which was a public school. Then St. Joseph's just began the very first years of school. And so went through St. Joseph grade school, through grade school, junior high, and then did go to Lincoln East High School for my high school, and then UNL for a few years in architecture, and then from there discerned God's call to the priesthood. And so in all those experiences were good in different ways, just the schools and approaches. And I would study and make sense things. I would work at trying to understand things. But for myself, and you always get good teachers here and there. But it wasn't until when I was in the seminary and kind of more these approaches about political education, about logic and critical thinking, and so many other things that gave me a newfound depth of appreciation and love for learning that I never had before. And so, reading and coming to understand more of what we're talking about with the Catholic liberal education, the more I read, the more I'm like, I wish I had this through all my school. I wish I had this from kindergarten on. Because a lot of it I kind of piecemeal together when I was in Toronto and the seminary in New York, with classes, but then even just things that were offered in those cities that allowed for that wonder. And so the more I read, it's just like, I can just see, knowing our specific students, how this is going to be helpful for them, and how it's going to be just so formative. A couple other points, they're all things we said earlier tonight, but before we repeat. So as we know, there's a great competition for our children's minds. Special effects, movies, smartphones, all these things. And so if in fact, we can incorporate this and it allows our children, whatever age they're at, because I remember plenty of times I was in classes I did not enjoy and just kind of pushing through. If this way of teaching can allow children, wherever they are in their ability of learning, if it allows their effective learning to grow, and that is instilled, that's going to be a huge way, again, of fighting a culture that is practically impossible to push out of your life. And so I really think this is a significant change in a good way that's going to improve our students. And all of us, these last 5 years have been crazy for all of us in so many different ways. And as been said, school systems in general have just gone totally different ways. And so this would be a way it needs for our kids to learn and how to use their reason, not go from emotion, how to use logic, how do you articulate what you are thinking or understanding. Those are things where, again, as was said, truth can be communicated. We don't have the power because the society says this, we have something else that we believe in, and we can say it with confidence. And so all of these different elements and aspects are, to me, are so exciting. I really hope this is a way in which we can do this. But all very good thoughts. suggestion, like I said, continuing that.
I was wondering what the next step is, if there are follow-up meetings or committees or
Right. Right, so, sure, so, yeah, so even just after this, this conversation, kind of engage, what is going to be the next fruitful steps for that? So, yeah, we'll look at that. So I can't say it concretely, but a lot of good suggestions have been made.
And I'm happy to help with issues or kind of sit down in the process that we've talked about, the collectively what way to proceed and how to engage, continue to have these kinds of engagements.
or the best way to give feedback would be in the meeting or
I'll volunteer to get the passports. Graduated this year, and I love the school. And I have to help as a commissioner to take the passports of these kids.
Is there anything that we could do to experiment with the pilot into summer? I know we have a really good active map program, and there are other people that are doing their homes, but I mean, is it Psalms, Shakespeare, Robert Louis Stevenson,
There are these book lists. There's the 100 books and 1,000 good books, and they're in by ages. And I can send you that. And you look at those books, how old the child is. I don't know what the other things
So Greg alluded to it earlier in his question. I know discipline has been an issue at St. Teresa School and sort of like a constant change each year. I wonder, how does the classical liberal arts curriculum approach help strengthen our discipline system, or will it fortify or provide some kind of consistency? And not only helping children like think for themselves and critically think about respecting themselves, respecting others, rejecting what the culture pushes at them. I just want you to speak more to that. We've had 3 kids go through St. Teresa's, but I have 5 more coming through, and that is a genuine concern of mine.
One thing I can say on that, I started doing just a little bit of technical education in the classroom, especially in areas of literature and poetry, memorization, things like that. And I can tell, like, I did this one book, it's called Princess and the Goblin this year, it's a small group. And the conversations that we were able to have, there's so much woven into that book. This is one example of virtue and heroism and self-sacrifice and different examples like that. That what I see is like this is just like me dabbling just a little bit into it. That it already had a positive impact on those students that read that book. And I have had my own reservations about this kind of education, but the more I could just learning about it, reading this book, and then trying different things, and then when I see the students come alive in the classroom in a way that they didn't before, we did stories from the Wonder series, and then we're doing these other literature. It's a huge difference, and so I think the virtue that's woven, and that's just one example of how there's probably other ways that I don't have an answer for all those questions, but that's just one that has helped me.
I can add to that. One of the things that all of these great books, but they do gender virtues, and virtues like self-control, respect, the dignity of the person. The characters that you read and the stories, have such a powerful impact that it does change your behavior. And I know that it can have, and then the teacher will teach virtue. So we'll talk about respect, and talk about what bullying is, and you can see these characters. So if you read a book that has bullying, and you'll be able to see what that is. And I've seen kids change their behavior because of these things that they read. And this isn't a plant, but I know that Joe and Mary Olka are here. And they just moved back to Lincoln, and they were at Our Lady of Lourdes. And I remember something she told me about how you were to change your kids. Would you mind sharing that? Or you or Joe? She grew up here.
Yeah, and we moved to Denver for some of his business opportunities. And I went to Our Lady of Lourdes really just because my brother was there, my friends were there, and I had no idea what classical meant. And I wasn't hesitant because I heard such good things about it, but I was like, what is it makes it different? And immediately I saw change in my daughter. She was very artsy, she sings. So I was like, okay, well, that's like normal. They encourage that. They encourage singing and anyway, she's artsy, and this has a lot of art in it, so she thrived. I have several boys that are busy, and they're not artsy. So I was like, how are they gonna, how is this gonna help them? Are they gonna be more busy? Are they gonna be bored? So I can't explain it, but they flourished, like beyond my imagination. They came home, they were interested, they were joyful, they learned stories about virtues. And so you totally put me on the spot. I didn't think of what I was going to say. If any of you guys have questions, I would love to share our experience because I saw such a transformation that when I came back, I ran into Bishop. The first day he got back, I was like, how can we do this over again? Because it transformed my kids. And it was truth, beauty, and goodness. Like they were learning that in every aspect. You want to say something?
Yeah, too, and just from a father's standpoint, the change that I saw in our kids when they were part of this curriculum was transformative for me as a dad. I sort of realized that it matters what my kids are learning and how they're interacting with other kids and teachers at school. And sitting in on a few different things after school. One thing was in fifth grade, when they were learning about U.S. history, and they had a Paul Revere's Ride was one of the books that they were reading. And they did this, all the students in the class, they did this something dressed up in sort of period clothing. And they recited these things, and you would think, well, this seems kind of silly, but these are all 10-year-old boys, and they just ate it up. And I remember thinking,
They learned.
Yeah, and it's still good. Yeah. And so that's what light came on to me, and that wow, there's something really different from this. And I was a product of all school education my whole life. And I just sort of started thinking to myself, wow, this is just amazing, amazing opportunity for them. And I really, it's hard to describe a little bit, but from a boy's standpoint, I was always a fidgety boy myself in class. And the way that the liberal arts model it encourages them, it gives them the opportunity to be up on their sheets, moving around, doing science, doing projects projects that I have with using math manipulators. And so it's just, it's.
Engaging in dialogue, I would say that helps too. When your kids part of the learning, they regurgitate it more, and it's more enjoyable. And my experience growing up and the school we were at before was it was a lot of worksheets and memorization, and kids are just kind of come home like, yeah, like done. I don't know if your kids, they're just done. Not at works. Like they came home and they're like, Mom, this is what I want today. Did you know how I made it for mommy? I don't know. And everyone else take the brain out. Anyway, I was like, he went into detail. That's like kindergarten. And I just saw a huge change in them. And we ended up coming back for his work, and it kind of broke my heart because I just felt like I took them away from something amazing.
And so that's why when we we're back, it's.
And Allison is at Pius, and she's doing great. So this does move on to high school. Like, it just teaches them critical thinking.
Framework for learning.
Yeah.
And really instills love for learning, so that they're not just, learning, they're not just memorizing the thing because the teacher memorized the thing. They're all in it, they want to keep learning and making connections with the world and how different things fit together. Like Bishop was saying, it's sort of an inclusive curriculum in that you could be learning about like a particular picture, stained glass, and how the impressionism of that art is, and then also the shape of it, particular triangle, and then the dimensions and architecture. It all sort of it all sort of fits together, and that helps I can see it in architecture, it helps them learn that the world isn't just separated into subjects and everything kind of works together.
And it's all created by God. It all brings it back to God as a creator. So I noticed that too. And that they clicked that. It wasn't the teacher told them. So, if anyone has questions, feel free to
Thank you.
My husband and I have kids here.
We are good.
Sixth grade with William, and we actually participated in, it's called classical conversation, so it is process, so it's very ecumenical. And while we were in that program, we had reading versions of the Catholic Church in a Protestant program, so that was pretty amazing to see.
Freak some people out.
Yeah. We were sponsors of these lovely families, so it's amazing because you, especially going through because we learned the timeline, starting with creation, and so much of it is intertwined with our faith, as it should be. And I think they would personally put it all together, and it really does bring out our Catholic roots and brought people to the church. What was I going to say? We'd be happy to answer any questions. When we got the email, honestly, we felt like, I know people were shocked, like, where did this come from? We felt like we had just opened a giant gift. Because when I got sick, we discerned that homeschooling was no longer the best for our kids. Fortunately, we had a Catholic school 3 blocks away, and I'm waiting for them, and it's been wonderful to have them here. But our heart was kind of torn because we knew what education had given them for those 7 years at our home. The conversations and the Latin we had started, and everything we had shared together was such a gift. And I know the dynamic will be different in a classroom setting, but I also know that just is more minds to have conversation with, and it will widen the perspective of what I could give them at home, just the conversation.
aspect of it will be amazing, I think, with the diversity of the classroom here at St. Teresa's. Like I said, we didn't experience a classical school, but we had it within our home, so we also be happy to answer any questions. We were really excited at the possibility of this. And we are so grateful that you would consider our school and all the great people in our school are truly. So thank you.
I get your wife first.
Dean Becker, maybe you can speak to this for me, but we have invited many students that are ESL learners into our community through the shutting down of my alma mater, St. Mary's and Sacred Heart. And I'm really concerned about learning rhetoric and grammar and all, the trivium, the quadrivium, if you're not an English speaker as your primary language. And I look around tonight and very few of those families are here, and did they even know? Did we do a good job inviting them to this particular meeting? There's no translator here. I mean, are we serving the entirety of our population? And that's a big concern to me, as this is my home. So maybe, I don't know how that
I
works.
think the best response that I can give you on that regard. The other school that's already ahead of me that's doing this is St. James Street. I don't know the exact number, the ratio, but I can tell you St. James Street is predominantly Hispanic, non-English language speaking families. That's what predominates their parish, their school. They're thrilled about it. You can talk about it, you little Sister Mary Ellen will get outside the she is to bring this model there. So the long and short of it, I think that is, it seems to translate well. But you're right, it has to be with deliberation. You got to think about your population, and how you're going to serve them and invite them into this. So I don't know, Sister, you talk to Sister Mary Ellen, I don't know why she's so excited about it.
The little bit that they have had already working with the students in the schools, kind of trying some of these things, the students, the language barriers are not present when you do some of this stuff, because they are able to interact with it as being great and they love that they are. And they progress much more quickly through it because they're able to make those connections instead of having everything in isolation. Everything is, there's a connectedness to it that helps students to make those connections so they can place words and those concepts and ideas that they're learning, and then allow those to flourish and they're able to make other words. We have taken students who come in knowing zero English, and within 6 months, they're participating greatly in class. Because they've built that into their culture. I would say they're at 60 to 70% non-English speaking in the home families in their school. I know that it can be done. I mean, I've been down there, I've seen those students in that population. I have had conversations with some of those families that have come from some of those other schools, like Sacred Heart. They're excited about this possibility, so they may not feel like they need to be here because they already have experienced some of that. So I understand your concern. I really do, and we do have people that can help you on that journey with those games.
It seems to me that it would be hard to learn rhetoric in the English language if you don't know the English language. Like, I don't understand that disconnect. And we also have Vietnamese population here, it's not just Hispanics. And I'm genuinely concerned that, like this gentleman not here said, are they gonna be pushed even more to the fringe? Because again, you look around this room tonight and they are not well represented from the schools that we have absorbed into our community. And I think that's a big concern for us as a community. If we're really trying to do this for the sake of the community, growing the community, are we serving the entire population or just the ones that speak English or speak English at home? And I would like some data on that because I don't feel like they're being represented.
I can speak as far as we've done a lot of like studying on the curriculum and specifically with grammar logic. And typically, I don't know what's the stress, typically it will be like grammar stage is from like kindergarten to fifth. The logic stage is 6 to 8, and the rhetoric stage is from 9 to 12. That's kind of a traditional model. So the rhetoric wouldn't be necessarily part of the curriculum at elementary as well. So I think that I just want to bring that up because I think there may be some confusion because although all of those components are part of the curriculum, they don't all happen simultaneously in the current grade level. So I just point that out, and I think also that the way that the classical curriculum are set up, people believe that's a whole issue in developing those curriculums. And I think that it actually, it might do, and coming from public school myself, and in an area where we have a lot of English and I think that there's an opportunity there for it almost make it easier for them to participate in the classroom when it's not so like formulated, when there's not just like check boxes to check out. Because what we've noticed in classical curriculum is it's sort of like every student is their own person, and the way that the teacher can serve them is like their own individual person. We serve their own potential. So just
And I think too, Sarah, in response to your question, the basal readers try to implement other cultures, but don't always do a fantastic job. And I think that with the trivia and teaching more history and real good literature, I think they'll be able to connect more to it because they'll see a lot more things that come from the culture and things that they can connect to, rather than just some random story that some people that comes from some people.
thank you for taking her question first. See, it works. I guess I want to respond because I appreciate what Renee said about seeing this gift in the email. But honesty compels me to say when I got that email, I felt like I'd been punched. Because there's this great confusion in me of this thing that I mostly want. And yet it's been discerned for my kids. I don't think anybody who knows me would be surprised if we were hanging out on a bridge and there's water beneath. It's not hard to get in a jump. It's really hard to get into my kids. And I want to know what's the depth of the water? Is there a current? What's the temperature? All these things. And I'm supposed to be their primary educator. And all this discernment happened without me. And I think about what Greg said about the discipline system, how many years in a row is it a new one? And what Lori said about some of the brokenness that's happened. And I think we do need to address some of that. Because nothing that's been presented tonight is something that I really want for my kids. But the way that it came to us, I think that was out. And had we started like we did tonight, with this invitation, I'd have been running around with posters.
You would too.
But that's my hesitation. Like, in all of this, I've heard nothing about a strategic plan that we just had 3 years ago. And I don't want us to just keep hopping. And I really appreciate the promise that you made, Dr. Eckert. And it gives me confidence, but keeping it open, great, but does it just continue to look different? And so I'm really for the things. I want my kids learning Latin. I want them learning logic. I want them chopping logic like crazy. Give me some solutions to kids. This is a place they need to be. But I
think hopping on that, my biggest concern right now is, well, maybe say it's in our hands and we decide, and what happens when 50% of the people don't want it and 50% do? And what in that wedge that will be in our community? We don't need more divisiveness. And that, and seeing how it started and the fears of how this is going to play out, I think that's my biggest fear right now is, well, yes, it sounds wonderful, but I don't want more divisions. I'm tired of being divided with my community.
I'd like to kind of piggyback on both of their comments. My heart is cold. Very much a product of the public school system. And I attended Wesleyan undergraduate in Los Angeles, a liberal arts college, and so I had to take courses in all kinds of different things. And after I converted to Catholicism, and I started reading people who were very learned and whatnot, I realized, wow, there's a whole lot of history and literature that was unknown to me. And as we, worked now for nearly 20 years with our kids in school, I just kind of want to echo exactly what Ray was saying. It's like we have had new ideas every couple of years, and then we see like the implementation of that being a problem. And then things don't get resolved and fester, and then it kind of just goes by the wayside because we move on to the newer thing. So the idea of a dividing school and a dividing parish that has come about in a variety of ways over the last several years, not the least of which was trying to incorporate kids in their schools and feeling like, Sister may say that the Diocese Administration Office was very supportive of that whole integration, but those of us parents who see it play out in our classroom and amongst our kids as friends see it very different. It feels very much like there hasn't been a lot of outreach from the diocese. It's more or less like saying, hey, how are you all doing here? And witnessing like exactly what Sarah's saying, that like I personally sent the invitation poster. I went through the school directory and invited families using cell phones and sent them text messages to say, please come to this meeting tonight. Every single family. And there aren't very many of the Vietnamese, the Latinos, those families that are here, and it breaks my heart. And it makes me wonder how many of the times that we've had things that we didn't do that. So that's kind of just the undercurrent of all. So what I really want to ask the question, and you said that, my understanding is that anybody who spent several years of their undergraduate work and going on to master's level work to teach, these lovely people back here that teach at our school, they were trained to teach a certain way, a certain method. Teresa kind of touched on this. My understanding is that in some ways, this is a wholly different way of teaching kids. And it's not enough to just say, it's a new curriculum, it's some new textbooks, and here's how we're going to teach this. But this may, on some level, require much more than asking the teacher to attend the weekend workshop, or even maybe a week-long conference during the summer. So, one of my thoughts and questions kind of very saying is, how much is going to be required to help retrain teachers and help them to be able to teach this so that it's effective and that we aren't back here in 3 or 4 or 5 years from now saying, okay, well, that didn't work, so now we're going to do some other kind of different curriculum or something. Because honestly, I was just thinking about, what does a classical curriculum textbook look like, or stories from antiquity look like? What's that like for 4th graders? I know what it looks like for a high school kid or a college kid. It's really, to be honest. I don't think that our junior high teachers, who I love them to death, but my kids honestly have struggled when they come home and talk about the novels that they're reading in junior high. And we ask them questions like, okay, you were supposed to do 5th grade, or 5th chapter 5 in this book, and what did you talk about in the classroom about? Who were the main characters? And we didn't talk about anything. And so I'm thinking if some of our teachers are struggling with conveying truth and beauty and goodness from the literature we currently have, how on earth are we going to expect them to do that with textbooks and curriculum that are wholly incomplete? And what is the cost that's going to be involved to them, to our school, to them? I'm all over that, but that's right.
Well, from an education perspective, teaching is teaching. So curriculum, the teaching methodology is teaching. So that said, it's a different model of teaching, but nevertheless it's the same model of teaching. It's just a different way to do it. The training is not so much new teaching. It's new teaching. It's a new way of thinking about the tools and being more select in the tools that we use, how you engage in these kind of discussions. What you and I can walk into a classroom and see is chaos. All these people up and moving around, because that's the method that we are trained in is classroom management. Everybody sits, raise your hand, play. Not that that's bad. But what you heard Dr. Poggo explain is not that, right? And there's a reason for it. And that active and engagement, participation, and learning is the key difference. How does the teacher teach? But it's not just the teacher teach, student learn. It's how do we cooperate in this learning venture? How do I, as a teacher, inspire my students to get engaged in this methodology rather than worksheet, chapter 3, worksheet number 2. I mean, again, nothing bad about that. That's the difference. It's not some whole new teaching style that teachers have to go back to school for 2 years and learn to teach class.
I love the actual idea, and I wish I had it. But it's good to know that they're safe in the classroom because the little snide comments they get to his friends, and those little defiant behaviors that a student will do, even to the teacher, that isn't addressed because oh, it's just a little thing this time. Those things culminate into an environment where our students feel unsafe. No, because I have kids, 8 kids go to the school, and some went through it, and they were embraced, and they felt part of the community. And we had some go to the school that had miserable experience because they were either made fun of or they witnessed other kids being made fun of and they keep them safe. And it took a long time to get them to start being good build any confidence. A kid like that can be very bright and will never have the opportunity to show it because they're too bright. So if you don't get that discipline under control, how you can help a group of kids that are moving around and doing all these things and not have that stuff go on. So I think that's part of the concern with the discipline, because there's no way teachers can see it. I've heard about it from my own kid, that stand in line and somebody makes a really big snide comment to their friend that's very degrading, and nobody's, the teacher's not going to see it. She can't possibly see everything. So if we can't instill a better system, then the students that really get flourishing is will never flourish. They will just be hurt over and over. So that would be, I love the program. I'm concerned with the implementation.
I think it's a very legitimate concern. You're seeing that in the school and your kids are experiencing that. Yeah, by all means. Will need to be addressed.
On the focus area, let's work with the local, let's make sure that we can this kid and whatever the reasons are, but I would always ask, what are you doing for mine? Nothing. There's nothing that will help you take this from the counseling. Well, you need counseling, you need a job. And but there was nothing done for the kid that's just quiet and doing what you're supposed to do, but doesn't do it. Nothing's happening. So I think maybe I don't think the words I didn't know, but the part of the concern with this, not just to change it, we just don't have to grasp it.
You mentioned that this is a proposal to us, and it's up to our buy-in. And I'm just wondering, how and when will the ultimate decision be determined?
Well, the time frame that I proposed to Father Badavi would be to take the time through summer and fall semester and come to an idea whether you want to do this or not by the end of the calendar year, so that we can begin taking concrete steps to set this thing up for some type of implementation in fall of 2022. But that, even then, it's a fairly ambitious timeline for implementation. But I don't think it's too ambitious to look at that and say, by the end of this year, you should be able to have an idea whether or not you think this is a fit for your community.
And just for clarity on that, do you mean we would begin K-8 implementation, or do we start at one level and work in? I just don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's entirely going to have to be a local decision. You're going to have to look at that and say, what's the best way for us to do this? We go full, jump into the pool, or do we wait in? That's okay.
So I have 2 years old kid gets in, Bill has 1. What happens when like Father Conley leaves or Sister leaves? Like, what do we do then? Like, what if the next person's not on board?
Yeah. Here's, I think the best thing that I can tell you is that it isn't dependent on persons, right? So the curricular model at my parish, St. Joe's, relies on the teachers and the administrators, but it's not dependent on them. So what we would want to be very careful and very thoughtful about would be, if those changes occur, then who should be the right person to come in after, right? So that's how we would address that concern. So we would make sure that administrative leadership team felt confident that they could lead this.
Our children are already through this grade school and high school and college. We came tonight because we wanted to see what the possibilities are. Before I say anything else, I want to thank you for being here. I also want to thank our teachers. I second what the other teachers said, that I have all the faith in the world in our sisters. I think that the question that I keep thinking about was the first thing that was proposed this evening, is what is our response in educating our children so that when they go out into the world, they become the saints that Sister Mary Cecilia talked about.
if the school decides not to adopt this program, then we need to look at something else. Because the current status quo will not be what the children need when they get out to the world. And the other thing I was thinking about was our youngest one was fortunate to go to Benedict College. And she said throughout those 4 years that the students that she noted that really knew how to approach life, walk into the world, live their faith, and they owned their lives for those that had gone to homeschooling. And so I see this program very similar to that, learning to take ownership, creating that sense of wonder, that collaboration. And I don't think, like anything else, we're going to have the nitty-gritty all figured out before we start this. If we do that, we'll never start. Anytime you have a big project like this, if you look at the big thing, if you look at the whole cornfield, you can't take a look at it. You just start with one row and begin there, and then you troubleshoot. But again, I think it's taking it back to that original thing. How will we begin to teach our children to prepare for the world that they are stepping into? I assure you the status quo is much more. So again, thank you.
So what are the actual tools you will have to be able to assess if you know what to do? What are you going to have? What are the right, we're supposed to be, sounds like basically the fall semester will have to evaluate it. And what are you going to provide to assess?
We'll
Yeah, I would propose, group was close together to read this and discuss. That'd be an excellent place to start. So at least you're introduced to the concept, and then how does that look to you as a parent? And you see your kids in there, somewhere.
Well, it also looks really good, like you said. But again, what, how it increases in it. Implement it, and you're going to be putting different things, it sounds like, kind of introducing the concept. So it might be helpful if we know as we're going, we're going to do some things, but it might be helpful to talk to some of the people that think another kind of big video like this.
I want to. Well, they started their journey toward this several years ago. And then they are moving on to full, much more full implementation starting this fall. So they have been working with again, faculty, staff, and parents for the better part of the last 2 years to roll it out. So it's still, yeah, it's still living.
I guess I would agree with her. Like, I came to this not even knowing what this meant. Like, what is this? It sounds to me like this is that goes really like it's classic teaching your kids versus reading. And I tend to lean towards louder, so I'm all for it. But at the same time, I'm not listening. So figuring that out and getting some people here that are part of the school where they've done it. Yeah, times 10 maybe. Like, how would you awesome? Teachers, administrators, like little things that like, yeah, I still like all I know for every night. You know, I know there's a book, but I think hearing it firsthand, some people that go a long way.
That would be entirely possible. I know Rosemary beat that up, but Rosemary had to do it for the school in Denver. It's made it out to do that.
And to that point, we had that down in St. Joe, Missouri. So down in St. Joe, Missouri, the guys in Kansas City, they, St. James, right? And they figured out this. They had a study committee from XCLE. So they built them out, built them in, at groups, answer questions, and tell you what this looks like.
I'll tell you, we have the schedule to come in the spring.
their fall calendars already filled up, they're not able to get here. But they are planning on coming in the spring to be able to work for 2 days with the faculty as well as have a paid review. Sorry, do this?
The Institute for Catholic Education.
But for the purpose of this, maybe reach out to somebody, go in there, she's being offered, visit, and have a staff conversation.
She'd be good, she's done it.
Yeah.
Right, she started from scratch, she didn't know anything about it, none of the teachers did, and the process took years.
Yeah.
She do.
What can we learn from Sacred Heart? If they had a classical curriculum that had a little capital education, what can we learn from that?
Well, closing Sacred Heart, and because I helped them get started. And like Dr. Becker said, you know, it wasn't the curriculum, it was and I think there were some teachers here. Was anybody come here? Okay, left. Maybe that's a good idea, to teacher. In learning, it was a slow process for that. Laura announced, and she was working on it year after year. So they didn't just switch it. But one thing that popped in my mind is one of the teachers, I know one, I would like being a teacher.
One of the first grade teachers, Christopher, this is our sheriff. The sheriff.
Yeah, that's comes to mind. You might be one of the meetings. Or so he's going to teach you Greek.
Oh, okay. He was in junior high, and he didn't know anything about classical education. It was just the place that he found a job, and he loved it. Absolutely loved it. My niece went there. She loved it. She learned so much. He loved it so much that when Sacred Heart closed, even though they really, really, truly wanted a Catholic education for their children, he went on to working at a smaller school that they started specifically for this kind of education. And now that school, I suppose for different reasons, he's gone on to another small school here in Lincoln that has this particular kind of education. He has so many good things to say about it. He absolutely loves it. And I'm sure we can come back here and questions. But from what I'm listening to this meeting, and I'm hearing a lot of people talking about how they weren't happy with the way that this was communicated. All my kids are really little. I haven't had some of the issues that a lot of parents have had with bullying or whatever people with bigger children have had here at St. Teresa's. I'm very grateful for that. But I just sincerely hope that the communication and the way that it was communicated is not clouding the judgment of what this opportunity could be in our school. Because I think a lot of what the classical education does is it tries to overcome some of that. And I do, I hear repeatedly in some of these meetings, we need to work on communication as parents, we need to work on communication as a school, we need to work on communication. yes, let's do that, but also moving beyond that communication piece, let's look at the opportunity that we have. The opportunity that's being presented to us, and look at that opportunity for what it is rather than how it's communicated. That's all I'm saying.
I think a lot of that, feeling will be dissipated as long as the communication moving forward is much better. So that we know it, we know what's going on, what it looks like, what you said, this is, and maybe you have to spell it out. First grade is doing this, and this reflects the class, the movement towards the liberal education. We have to be told. We just have to be told. We can't figure it out on our own. Oh, is this part of that? Is this from that? We just don't know. And not necessarily that the kids have to know that's what it is, but as parents, just so we know what to look for. Otherwise, we're not gonna know if this was just something new that this teacher is doing, or if it was because they learned about it with the, it's part of that. And maybe reading the book will help us recognize some of that. But I mean, actually, just tell us, just spell it out, because that's what my husband always tells me. You have to spell it out, otherwise you don't know what you mean. So we can take that approach. Maybe everyone needs that.
I agree.
I have a question. I heard earlier somebody was saying how things get implemented, and sometimes it's just kind of hard to hear for your kids and everything going on. But correct me if I'm wrong, I thought, Dr. Becker, that you said something about by the end of the first semester that we should have with some sort of idea. But then didn't say, somebody say that there's the group or presentation that would be in the spring. And so I'm just kind of curious as to how to make the decision.
So if I waited until January to contact them, there's no way they can go.
Right.
So if I get them on the calendar, reserve it, I can cancel them if this is not the way we want.
Wouldn't that be helpful? So that's what I'm trying to understand. What would that, what you were talking about that you have scheduled, does that come prior to making the decision, or is that something that is just informational after the decision is made?
There are things happen, like, there are teachers that will be going to a national conference about this over the summer. I've got things lined up for myself throughout the year that I'm going to do regardless of which way we go. I have this reserved for the spring. There are opportunities throughout the year for me to take some teachers to go visit a school that is implementing this so that they can talk to those teachers, give resources, give hands-on, whatever. And that's throughout the year. We can bring people in anytime. So that's not contingent on the implementation.
So that one
It's
is
more of a workshop, I think, is what.
it's a workshop.
I think that's what he said for the teachers.
Right. And then there would be an opportunity to for them to
So it
talk
wasn't
to
something
parents.
they would be coming to see for, parents.
They can, and they have that on their schedule, so that they can also help